Okay, I just wanted today to take advantage of these pretty neat virtual reality models that were created for us to show you the differences in the GI tracts of monogastric herbivores, your animals like your horses, guinea pigs, and then your ruminants, cattle, sheep, goats, that sort of thing. Our monogastric herbivores are what we call hindgut fermenters, so most of the action, the digestion, the fermentation, and digestion and absorption takes place towards the end of the GI tract, where ruminants, it takes place at the front of the GI tract, so the ruminants are called foregut fermenters. So let's start with the stomach. In a lab downstairs, we already will have talked about the monogastric carnivore stomach. And if we look at the stomach of a horse, there's not much to it. A lot of the same sorts of structures here. The esophagus enters into a region called the cardia, although in horses it enters at a pretty extreme angle. And that, combined with the strength of the esophageal sphincter that controls the food into the stomach, those two things, the angle at which the esophagus enters and the strength of that sphincter, both combine to make it physically impossible for these types of animals to vomit. And that's, in part why things like colic, when we have a horse that's got, an intestinal, a partial obstruction or something of that sort, that can get, very serious very quickly. They're unable to relieve any kind of that pressure through vomiting. But otherwise, esophagus comes into the cardia, and then most of their stomach is body. In our carnivores, there was a large outpouching about here that we called the fundus, and that, as you may remember, is a place for birds to store their meals. Carnivores are, intermittent eaters. They eat when they can catch a prey item, whereas our herbivores, they tend to eat more or less consistently. They're always grazing, so they don't really have a need to store food, unlike or that may have, more limited but larger meals at a time. So not much fundus there. Most of it is body, and then, of course, the pylorus. The only other sort of difference with horses is in our carnivores, the entire interior of the stomach is glandular. Contains those glands that secrete hydrochloric acid, the pepsinogen, those sorts of things. In horses, they have what's called a composite stomach, meaning that it has a glandular part, a glandular part. There's a part that contains all of those glands, and then a part that does not. And you can see sort of on this model, there's a difference in the mucosa here. The glandular part of the stomach is the part around sort of the cardia here, where the esophagus would enter, and then your aglandular part is this part. How easy it is to see on this model or not, but there's kind of a folded, it's kind of squiggly, but in a real horse's stomach, there'd be a clear demarcation, and I think the model does a pretty good job, at least in terms of how the mucosa looks. But there's a clear sort of folded demarcation between the glandular part, glandular part, and that's called the margo plicatus, which literally means the folded margin. Other than that, a horse's stomach, so the angle that the esophagus enters, the fact that they have a composite stomach and they really lack a fundus, it's very much like our monogastric carnivore stomachs. So we get some protein digestion there, but as you can imagine, horses are not eating meat, so a lot of what they consume is not protein; it's vegetable matter. So we'll come back to where they do the majority of their digestion when we get to the hindgut. And if I put the stomach here, you can kind of see it's tucked in there. That's where it would fit in with the overall GI tract, and you can see on the horse with the skeletal system on where this would fill up the abdominal cavity over there. So let me grab the, figure out how to use this. Here we go. Grab the ruminant forestomach here and move this over. Just trying to orient myself here. Okay. And where'd you go? I got to focus over there. So am I okay to stand here, Bill? You're good? Okay. So here's the ruminant GI tract from esophagus, the brown tube, into our foregut here, and then the intestinal tract. If I were to flip it over, we can kind of see the spleen wrapped around there, and there's the gallbladder. This tract, as it's facing now, the cow would be facing towards my left, so it's not in the position that it would be in the cow model behind us, but that's okay. From the left side, really all you see is the rumen. Now, maybe when you were growing up, you learned somewhere along the way, as a kid, that ruminants or cows have 4 stomachs. That's not technically true. They have a foregut, F-O-R-E gut, that is a large modification of the front of their GI tract that has 4 chambers that make it up. One of those chambers is analogous to the stomach that you or I have, or that a dog has, or that our horse has. But they do not have 4 stomachs. They have a foregut, F-O-R-E, gut. And from the left side, it's all rumen. If I turn this around, oops, I'm sorry, wrong model. This one just shows the thing all together. Let me find the one that shows it cut open. Let me move the foregut here to show you the internal aspect of the rumen. We were just talking about the rumen as being one of those chambers. It's the first of the chambers, and again, it's so that we're facing, the cow would be facing towards the left here. Esophagus is up here, and this is all rumen. So before we were looking at the left side of the cow, and all we saw was the ruminal sac. And you can see all these little, it looks like shag carpeting. Don't know if any of you still live in homes. When I was growing up, that was all the rage in the 1970s, carpeting with the long, or the deep pile, they called it. Those are all called ruminal papillae, and we've run into that term before. And those thousands and thousands of ruminal papillae are a way of increasing surface area for fermentation and absorption. So the rumen is a giant fermentation vat. So microorganisms within the rumen, bacteria, protozoa, fungi, they break down the vegetable matter that the ruminant is consuming. And in the process, they release compounds called fatty acids, or VFAs, and then those are absorbed through these ruminal papillae, and that's what the ruminant uses as an energy source. In close concert with the rumen is this section here, which is at the front. It's both cranial and a little bit ventral. That's the reticulum. And these two chambers, the rumen and the reticulum, work in concert. So sometimes they're referred to sort of as one, even though there is kind of a shelf of tissue there. It's not a complete division. Their contractions coordinate. So people will sometimes refer to all of this as the ruminoreticulum. And if you look at the inside of the reticulum, there's this honeycomb pattern. And in fact, that's its common name, the honeycomb stomach. So there's all these walls and partitions, just like in a hive with honeycomb. And what happens is that any plant material that's been swallowed comes in through the intestines. Anything that's small enough to allow those microorganisms to get at it and to ferment it is in the rumen. And they go to town on that. Pieces that are still too large to let those protozoal and microbial enzymes get at them end up sort of being sorted out by the reticulum and then passed back up the esophagus oral cavity. And that's what we know as ruminants ruminating or chewing their cud. Those large fibrous particles that are not yet ready for the microorganisms get sorted out by the reticulum, passed back up to oral cavity, re-insalivated, the cow chews them further, and the process repeats. Small particles end up passing on to the rumen, where they're fermented, and the byproducts, the VFAs, are absorbed. Anything that's still too large gets sorted out by the reticulum and then sent back up to the oral cavity for further rumination. So again, the ruminant, mostly rumen, a little bit of the reticulum there. On the right side of the cow, so now we're seeing the other two chambers. We have this chamber, which is called the omasum, and it has these fold in its mucosa that actually, and we have examples of this down in the lab that we will show you, but these folds form thin, almost like pages of a book, and so the common name of the omasum is the book stomach, and it's yet another way of increasing area. Most of the fermentation and absorption of VFAs went on in the rumen, but in the omasum we have absorption of electrolytes and water and some vitamins. And then finally, we pass on into this part, which is the abomasum, and that is analogous to our stomach, to a dog's stomach, to the horse's stomach. This is the true stomach, if you will, of the ruminant. Not very big. It's not as there's not as much variety to it. The stomach of the horse has sort of curve to it. The abomasum of a ruminant, even though, sort of looks larger here, it's pretty boring. It's just kind of a straight shot. There's not a whole lot that the abomasum has to do in the mature ruminant. Now, calf that is still nursing will need that, because there's proteins and there's fats that are in the milk that the calf is getting from mom, and we don't want milk, or the calf doesn't want milk coming in the esophagus and ending up in the rumen and being fermented. That's not useful to the calf. This is intended for when the calf is weaned and is eating solid food. So just the act of nursing actually triggers a muscular response that fold that allows milk to go into the esophagus and actually bypass the reticulum and the rumen and end up instead in the abomasum, where it would be digested just like a puppy or a kitten or a foal would digest it. Once the calf or the other juvenile ruminant starts to eat solid food again, there's a reflex that's stimulated, and that tube, that fold that creates the bypass between the esophagus and the abomasum rolls, and then ingested material will go from esophagus to the reticular rumen, just as it would, as we talked about with the adults. So that's called the esophageal groove or the reticular groove, and again, it's just a muscular reflex. The foregut knows to roll itself into this tube to bypass the fermentation aspect. So that's the foregut of cattle. When we get to the small intestine, which would be the next part after the stomach or the foregut, small intestine in cattle and horses really a whole lot different than in carnivores. And we've already sort of talked about that, or we'll talk about that in lab. But where we start to see a lot of species variations again is when we get to the hind gut. So let's go back to horse here. Too far. And there you are, okay. So here's our horse GI tract again, esophagus, stomach coming in here. And then this pink mass here is small intestine here. And then the horses have an extremely complicated, or rabbits as well, any of these hindgut fermenters, they have a very complicated large intestine. And by large intestine we mean the cecum, the colon, and then the rectum, I guess, is not particularly specialized, but the cecum and the colon in our hindgut fermenters is pretty specialized. So this is the right side of the horse. Here I have it turned so that the side, and almost the entire right side of the horse is taken up by this structure here I'm sorry. I get my left and right, and that doesn't look like the cecum, and nor is the horse pointing so that would be the right side. This whole structure here that takes up almost the whole right side of the horse is the cecum. In our small our dogs and our cats. Cats had almost no cecum to speak of. Dogs have a small little pouch at the end of their small intestine, the beginning of their large, but that's because those animals eat a lot more meat and very little vegetable matter. Cats, being strict carnivore, really don't have more than just a tiny little bleb that represents their cecum. Dogs are, even though they're in the order Carnivora, they're really a little bit more omnivorous, right? You can give your dog some baby carrots or a slice of apple. They do eat some more vegetable matter. But our hindgut fermenters are eating a plant diet. And that's just like ruminants, except that the way that they've evolved is to do it towards the end of their gut. And so their cecum has been modified to be this huge structure. And this is the hindgut fermenter's fermentation vat. So the principle is in ruminants, just a different location in their gut. They do it at the end, whereas ruminants do it at the front. But you have microorganisms in here, bacteria, fungi, protozoa. They break that vegetable matter down, and it ends up releasing those volatile fats, which then the horse can absorb for its energy. The cecum is kind of bunched up. You can kind of see sort of a scalloped edge to it. There are bands of muscle in here called tinea, just like if you've heard of the tapeworm genus Tinea. That's origin for that name, because of these bands of muscle, and they gather the cecum up into these pouches. These pouches are called haustra. And the purpose of that is for ingesta to sort of sit in there longer. So food collects, or ingesta collects in those pouches, and it gives those microorganisms more time to break that material down, right? We're near the end of the GI tract, so if we don't get the digestion done pretty soon, we're not going to get it done. Those tinea, those bands of muscle, will gather up the cecum into these pockets, or these haustra, in order to prolong time in the gut. From there, the colon of the horse is very long and complex. In our carnivores, in our cats, our cadavers, you'll see that the colon is really mostly just descending colon. There's not much ascending or transverse colon, but in horses, they have both a large colon and a small colon, and the large colon is bent in sort of a double horseshoe shape. See if you can kind of appreciate that. So the small colon is in green. Our large colon is this color. I don't know what you want to call it, sort of a tannish pink color. But it's two horseshoes sort of stacked on one another. And it too has bands of muscle that gather it up in these pouches to help prolong digestion time. So anything that doesn't get digested in the cecum ends up being digested in the large colon. There are areas, because it's a double horseshoe, there are areas when it occurs here. There's a diaphragmatic flexure and a sternal flexure, and then back here a pelvic flexure where the colon makes a pretty sharp U-turn. Those are locations where impactions can occur. By the time we get to the small colon, which is the green part here, this is functioning very much like the colon of your carnivores. So pretty much all digestion has been taken care of in the cecum and in the large colon. In the small colon, it's a matter of reabsorbing water to form those fecal balls, or those apples, and along with the water, vitamins and electrolytes are absorbed. But in short, the colon, or the large intestine of horses, is much longer and specially adapted to give the ingesta a prolonged period of time for those microorganisms to digest all that fibrous material, as compared to the ruminants that do it all at the front of their GI tract. If we go to our ruminant GI tract again, a little too far. So this is the right side of the animal here, and here is our abomasum here, or our true stomach. and then that would enter our small intestine, which is some of this tan here. Eventually we come to the ileum, or the last part of the small intestine here, and then the cecum. The cecum in ruminants is large, but not nearly so large as it is in our hindgut fermenters. So there's still some vegetable matter that escapes fermentation within the foregut, and the cattle catch it in the cecum here, which again is large, but not as large as in the hindgut fermenters, but certainly much larger than your carnivores. And then they have a modification of their colon called a spiral colon. The is, as the name implies, arranged in this spiral fashion. So if we were to stretch that out and it were linear, that's another way, again, of increasing surface area for digestion and absorption of those volatile fatty acids. So even though cattle do most of theirs at the front of their gut, there's some mopping up, if you will, to do, and they do in this modified spiral colon and cecum that's large, but not as large as in the hindgut fermenters. By the way, swine also have a spiral colon. The difference in swine, though, is instead of being laid out in a flat spiral like this, it's piled up into a cone, essentially. But swine are more omnivorous as well. They will eat pretty much anything. So they have some aspects that are like carnivores, and then they have some more like our herbivores, like the spiral colon. And then, of course, when we get to the rectum, in both our equine and our ruminant, there's not much difference there. It's a short, straight segment of intestine. That's where it got its name, rect, meaning straight. And we get reabsorption of water, vitamins, and the formation of feces. Species variations, of course, different species absorb different amounts of water from the fecal material. Horse apples, of course, are generally fairly dry, and cow pies are not. And that's just, that's evolved. There's no real significance to that. They just have different abilities to reabsorb water from the colon. So that is a quick comparison, anyway, of the differences that we see in our other species besides the carnivores, besides our cat that we dissect in lab. We have the foregut fermenters here in the ruminants and the hindgut fermenters there. So now I don't know how to end this.